Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. It's good to see you all. We've been expecting you. You have joined Intentional Conversations VodCast, where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion, leadership, and business. And we're so glad that you're joining us for this hour. We ask that you please go to the chat. Let us know where you're joining the conversation from. It's always a treat for us to see where people are joining from. We have a great representation across many different states and even some folks who join us that are in some global markets. And we're always so grateful that people see fit to spend this time with us. Please take to the chat. Let us know any other information about yourselves in addition to where you're joining the conversation from. For example, if you are inclined to let us connect with you beyond this window of time today, then we invite you to share your LinkedIn information. It's a way for us to stay connected. And I also want you to know that cameras are welcomed and encouraged, but certainly not required. And so if you're just here in auditory capacity and just want to observe, then we're glad you're here. If you're joining us by LinkedIn Live, I want to acknowledge each of you as well. I also want to encourage you that if you wish to optimize your experience, we do believe that being a part of the Zoom community as part of this podcast is a better experience for you. And so my team is going to place that information into the comment section in case you want to switch over. We'd love to welcome you into this Zoom community. Otherwise, yeah, you'll also be able to be a part of today's conversation if you stay on LinkedIn. I want you to know that today, the chat and the comments and the LinkedIn Live, it's our way of getting proximate to each other, staying connected, really supporting each other with whatever type of feedback and commentary and resources that we think would be useful for the benefit of this community. We do also close out our Zoom room 30 minutes after the hour. That's part of our way of really helping to protect this space. And so I want you to know that if you happen to, for whatever reason, have to step out and you want to come back in and it's after 30 minutes, then we do ask that you go and join us on LinkedIn Live for the remaining of the show. I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I serve as a founder and lead principal consultant for NWC, and I am so glad to be in community with each of you today. Welcome again to Intentional Conversations podcast. Let the conversations begin. And that is precisely what we're going to do right at this point in time. If you're just joining us, once again, welcome to Intentional Conversations podcast. I am Dr. Nika White, and this is where we intersect conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest co-host today. Momentarily, I will provide a formal introduction of our guest co-host. I do want you to be aware that we have closed caption that has been enabled. That is our way at NWC of really showing up for disability inclusion. And so want you all to be made aware that that is available to you. And speaking of NWC, I would be remiss if I didn't take an opportunity to shout out my team who works tirelessly every single week to help us bring forth this specially curated VodCast experience. And so thank you to the NWC team. So while we're still in the month of July, I want you to know of some national observances that are taking place just so that we can be aware of ways in which we can plug in and maybe be even more intentional around our allyship role. But let's amplify disability pride. That is what we are celebrating the month of July. We know that June was Pride Month, so this month is Disability Pride. I also want you to know that the month of July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And so I'm really a big advocate of us assessing our mental health and using all of the tactics and strategies to be able to navigate that as best as possible. So let's help break the stigma. Let's talk about it often, and make sure that we're supporting each other in the best way that we can. Now, I continue to promote my book, Inclusion Uncomplicated, A Transformative Guide to Simplify DEI. in partnership with Forbes. And so I hope that you are taking advantage of whatever opportunities that are out there to increase your knowledge, your understanding. And this is one resource I hope that you will add to your toolbox. You can purchase it anywhere where you like to get your books. And I'm always grateful for those who wish to be in community with me in conversation around what you're learning as you engage in the book. We also at NWC have a number of specially curated experiences, learning experiences that are inspired by the book, Inclusion Uncomplicated. We have labeled this learning experience Unravel the Knot. And if you're interested in learning more about how you can bring such an opportunity to your organization, we'd love for you to reach out to us. My team will place into the chat the link that gives you a bit more information, and we'd love to have a conversation to delve a bit further. Now, I have been also sharing that I have just released my first LinkedIn Learning course, so I'm super excited to be among the many instructors for LinkedIn Learning, and my course is all about individual accountability for equity and inclusion. I hope that you will check that out. My team is going to place that link into the chat, and again, we'd love for you to spread the word. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of information for what you have to look forward to in future weeks as we welcome some additional guests, as we always do each week on Intentional Conversations podcast. We have next week Lillian Forsyth that's going to be joining us. And in that conversation, we're going to discuss why DEI efforts at organizations should focus much less on hiring and much more on performance management, making inclusive behaviors part of every leader's performance review, and how to integrate DEI principles into all soft skills training. So I look forward to that on July 28th. And then following that, we're going to kick the month of August off on August 4th with Jaya Sayaxni. And in that conversation, we're going to discuss career pivots and how her experience with race as a South Asian woman shapes her approach to doing the work of DEI. I look forward to that. We often try to bring many different voices and experiences and perspectives to this community. And so I look forward to those two guests in the future weeks. And then following that, on August the 11th, we have Melissa Watson Ward. And Melissa's work with Emerge is what we're going to be discussing. Emerge is a political organization designed to help more women and non-binary leaders get into elected office, and how the new American majority is not yet reflected in our elected officials. Surprise, surprise, right? No surprise at all, indeed. But we're going to talk about that and unpack it with Melissa on August the 11th. So mark your calendars, and I hope that you will join us. We are right now rounding out the booking of our guest co-hosts for Q4 of this year, and we are beginning to look at Q1 of 2024. Gosh, I can't believe I just said that, but yes, we are booking now also for Q1 of 2024. And so if you're interested in providing a recommendation to us to consider as a guest co-host of Intentional Conversations podcast, we'd love to hear from you. You can send that information to Amora Carter, and Amora email is amora@nikawhite.com. We'll also place that into the chat. But many of our guest co-hosts have come to us by way of recommendations from you all. So we're always grateful for those recommendations coming our way. Now, if you've been with us for quite some time, you know that I always take a moment to read the formal bio of our guest co-host, sometimes even against maybe their wishes, but I do this because I feel it's critically important for people to know the perspective, the experience, the credentials, the accolades in which our guest co-hosts show up to the conversation. So help me right now to welcome our guest co-host, Aaisha Joseph, and here is her bio. Aaisha, and her pronouns are she, her, hers, is passionate about inclusion and equity, and she found her calling in the championing of rights of the marginalized. She believes that in order to make meaningful progress in the areas of racial and economic justice, cross-cultural listening, empathy, and understanding are key, and actions that lead to socioeconomic liberation of the historically and present-day oppressed are born out of uncomfortable yet necessary conversations. We're going to unpack that a little bit later. Aaisha is an avid writer, a vocal online advocate as it pertains to diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racism, and anti-Blackness. Aaisha received her bachelor's degree in business administration from the City University of York College. During her undergraduate studies, she was the recipient of several awards and scholarships, including Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's Emerging Leaders China Study Abroad program. After graduating, she began her career as a C-suite executive assistant, supporting and advising senior executives, including CEOs and founders, across a span of industries, both in the for-profit and nonprofit sectors, including the beauty powerhouse Estee Lauder. Compelled by the tumultuous events in 2020, she pivoted to help organizations and individuals create inclusive and anti-racist spaces and mindsets as a DEI and anti-racism coach and consultant. Aaisha is excitedly working on her first book. Maybe she'll share a little bit with us about what's inspired that book. But right now, I want you to take to the chat, go to the comment section if you're joining us via LinkedIn Live, and I want you to share whatever type of accolades or whatever affirmations to help us welcome our guest co-host today, Aaisha Joseph. I am so glad to have you. Thank you for saying yes to our invitation. And I am thrilled to be in community with you today. And so welcome, Aaisha.
Thank
And
you so much.
I'm going to jump into our first question because it is routine here. It's kind of tradition that after we read the bio, before our guest co-host will greet us in any way that feels appropriate for them, that we ask that they please consider sharing with us something about yourself that we would not know from reading your bio or from reading your LinkedIn profile. So welcome, Aaisha.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Dr. White, for having me. I'm super thrilled to be here. Oh my gosh, I could barely sleep last night. I've put myself out there a lot on social media. And so I've been I'm just thinking right now, racking my brain, trying to figure out what it is that people do not know about me, because they pretty much know almost everything. But I have to say, I do, and this is I guess the first time I'll say will have said it publicly, I struggle with anxiety. And so I really appreciate your nod to Disability Pride Month. And a lot of people wouldn't know that. They do not know that until now. If they're watching me, have been followers for the last 3 years or so, it's like, what? But yes, our mental health is really important. That's one of the things that I personally struggle with. And so, yeah, that's something that you definitely would not know or think about me from just looking at me or from any of my posts on LinkedIn. So it's a really personal, but I'm happy to share it.
Well, we are honored that you have shared that information with this community. And I believe I've socialized this before from time to time. It doesn't come up often, but from time to time. I'm also a big advocate of mental health. And I too struggle from anxiety. And so many people in my family and that I know in my circle and my network do as well. And so again, it's not something that we need to shy away from socializing around because it happens to so many of us.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate your willingness to boldly share with this community. Okay, so we have lots that I want to talk about today. And I want to start first with some elements that have surfaced into current news. And there's so much, especially so much related to this broad topic of DEI, or the lack thereof, I should say. But Florida. So this week, Aaisha, we heard that Florida just approved new Black history standards that includes noting enslaved people develop skills that could be applied for their personal benefit. I know, just let's just all take a deep breath right now.
Right.
Just all take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath on that one.
I know it feels like it's been one thing after another, one thing after another. So when I read that this week, to be honest, I can't say that I was really surprised. It was just like, here we go again.
Right.
So I just, many people have been exposed to that news and I've seen a lot of chatter about it. As someone who really cares deeply about anti-Blackness, anti-racism, I would just love to get your reaction to this latest Florida, bless their hearts, news.
Bless their heart. Yeah, I'm not shocked that went through. What I mean, it does what white supremacy always attempts to do, is to make it seem that Black people are nothing without white folks, right? Like that we have no skills, there's nothing inherently worthy or beautiful or just important about us if it's not connected to the labor that we've put out. And so this is something that just continues to advance that narrative. I mean, what were we doing before slavery? Were we just sitting around and just not doing anything? I mean, no, we had professions. Even if it's not professions in the sense that we talk about today, right? But we had multiple skill sets. just, I would say the kind of one of the at the forefront of science and physics and geniuses. Like, we ruled, we were kings and queens. And so for someone to just have the audacity to say that our skill set and our worth came from being enslaved, that is offensive in the highest of levels. And it's something that we should just reject vehemently, because it continues to tether us to this idea that, again, Black folks are nothing without white people. And we know that that is just not true. So it's, yeah.
Definitely not true. I reject it as well. I think so many in this community, of course, reject it as well. And so we're not going to spend any more energy there. We're going to shift. Okay.
Yes.
So the next thing that is finding its way into the conversations of late is this mass exodus all of a sudden of high profile DEI leaders and professionals that are a part of some really large brands. And so I'll just kind of read some of them that have just recently left their posts. And I want to just get your reactions to, why do you think that's the case? And what should we be concerned about and doing as it relates to people that are quite respected, that are leaving this work? And so among them are Disney's Chief Diversity Officer and Senior VP, LaTondra Newton. Of course, Netflix Head of Inclusion and Strategy, Verne Myers, we all know. Warner Brothers Discovery SVP of DEI, Karen Horn, and EVP of Impact and Inclusion, Janelle English. And there's so many more. All of these, by the way, are women of color. And it seems like each week there's an announcement of another individual that's leaving their post. And so, and for whatever reason, let me put that out there. You know, I don't want to send the message that they're leaving on their own. I don't know all the circumstances, but the fact that these individuals are no longer in these very high profile positions that help to serve as a model, right, in some regards. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't think many people are going to like my thoughts about this, to be very honest. Okay, so how I feel about it, I think I don't want to take away from the work that any of these women have done in their space. I don't want to do that. But I see it a couple ways, right? So like, one, you know, I'm getting the sense that with all the Supreme Court rulings that have came down, there could just be this sense that all of this work that I've put in and everything that I have been trying to achieve in this space, where am I really going to see any tangible difference that's really going to move the needle forward for generations? Am I making an impact enough? Maybe it's been a time of just self-reflection about, is what I'm doing enough to get Black people to where that we need to be if these systems keep shutting us down, along with the pushback that I'm always receiving. I'm sure they're always receiving when they're in boardrooms and at their organization. And so it could just be like, you know what, enough is enough. I need to reevaluate my approach and think about how, you know, we can actually maybe even shy away from the models that we've been using to kind of think about something more radical that we can do to implement change. That's one idea that I have about maybe why these are happening. You know, to be quite frank, I'm not a fan of a lot of the DEI work that is happening in these spaces. I mean, you have organizations, for Google, for example, where the rate of minorities, particularly Black individuals who are hired into the organization, they move so slow and steadily at like these 1% increments. And so it's like, okay, 1 year it's like 3%, maybe the next 2 years it's like 4%. And then the next 2 years, it's like 6. And then at the end of the year, there's a diversity report, annual report that says, okay, we still have so much work to do. And so for me, I'm not impressed either way at the pace that we're going. And this is not, again, to take away the work that these individuals are doing. But in my mind, if you're not going in if you're not going in and acquiescing to the comfort levels and the timelines that these white individuals have placed on you, and you're actually like, you know, trying to push things in a way that our community needs, I really don't see the need for you to be there. And I'm just being quite frank. I don't see the need beyond you getting a paycheck, like beyond able to say, okay, like I've implemented these processes, or, like our, again, just very kind of like, and we're going to get into this, I believe, but like very kind of surface level change
Yeah.
that's mainly happening as opposed to like structural. And so, in my opinion, a lot of them weren't needed there in the first place. And again, a lot of people are not gonna like what I say, but this is literally how I feel. I think the current state of DEI work right now is not enough. I think it is centered so much on what white folks are willing to give to us that it's become completely almost ineffective. So
Yeah. So Aisha, I so appreciate your perspective. And I think that that is part of the criticism that of late has been amplified by a lot of audiences who are questioning the efficacy of DEI. They're calling it a distraction. They're saying it's not effective. And I believe that there are two camps of people, right? There are some who are really much on the side of, I am here to drive towards impact, sustainable impact and change. And then there are others who are playing into whatever type of culture and system that the environment in which they do this work in will tolerate and allow them. And that's a hard place to be. And so, one of the things that I often socialize around is that, especially when this topic has been surfacing in recent conversations about people leaving their post, is that I'm not here to shame, guilt, or judge those individuals because I don't know. I often talk about how it's up to each of us to know our triggers. It's up to each of us to know what kind of emotional capacity we have to drive towards change in whatever kind of environments. And we have to make those decisions for ourselves. But I think generally speaking, it is something for us as a community of professionals to interrogate. Why is that? What can we do maybe collectively to help ease maybe some of those burdens that practitioners are carrying that causes them to burn out and to become so fatigued to where maybe they leave, or to become frustrated with the fact that there's so many blockers and barriers, right? And so again, not something to fix, and there's really not a right or wrong. It's just something I believe that we need to continue to interrogate. And so I appreciate your candor and you bringing your perspective and your thoughts to that question. Okay, so I want to talk about because one of the things that I read in your bio is that part of how you show up to this work is helping people to lean into the discomfort, and that to be effective, the uncomfortable yet necessary conversations have to happen, right? And so I don't want to get into all the specifics of the right and wrongs of maybe some discourse that has happened of late. You are very forthcoming in your social media, and I think that the boldness in which you stand in your truth is something that a lot of people admire, because not many of us do that. We mask, right? Or we break down. And but I also believe that there is an important skill that as DEI practitioners we have to have, and that is dialogue facilitation that is steeped and rooted in civil discourse. I bring this to the conversation because just recently I had the honor of facilitating a session with a group of scholars and fellows through the Faith and Politics Institute. And if you aren't familiar, if this community is not familiar with the Faith and Politics Institute, I'm going to ask my team to drop a link into the chat, because I want you to understand the context of this group. But when we think about faith and politics, those are topics that are incredibly personal to each of us. And it begs the question of why are we not, as a society, individually and then collectively, doing more to help upskill people around how to have those difficult conversations, right? Where there could be a level of discourse. So my question for you is, what do you find to be those important ingredients, particularly as a DEI practitioner, to help ensure that that people in general, as they are engaged in that type of dialogue, they are open to perspective taking. Brene Brown talks a lot about perspective taking, and they are open to the civil discourse to make sure that the conversation just doesn't end, because I believe that dialogue is important. So I just want to get your just general thoughts on that question.
Yeah, so what makes for a successful dialogue where people can actually hear each other as opposed to being combative, right? And I think that's an excellent question. I think there are always going to be folks who are combative and who will, and it's one of those things that you have to discern, right? So some people will come in just to kind of refute everything you say and not actually there to learn. And I think that's one of the important things, just first and foremost, is knowing, how do I identify when it's time to move on from a particular person in this conversation? But back to your question, I think one of the things that's so important is, I think, empathy, right? So like being able to step into someone else's shoes and understand that they grew up a different life than you have. And you have to understand that your experiences has shaped and filtered the way that you see and that you process in a way that is totally different from somebody else. And I think another element of that is curiosity. You have to be curious about people, because if you're not curious about people and why they think the way they think and how, why they feel the way they feel, then you're really not trying to come to a place of understanding each other. You're trying to come to a place to get them to agree to what you agree about, and and move them to your side. And so, and that's not really the goal. The goal is understanding, so that maybe we both can sit back and see a different perspective on something. I know that I've been in conversations and people have challenged me, not all the time, but challenged me in ways where it's like, oh, and I say to them, that's a really great point. I haven't thought about that, right? Like my goal is not to totally just like throw whatever my ideas are out there for you to just blindly intake them, but it's for us to open up a respectful dialogue. Because when it gets disrespectful, then I get on a whole nother level. But I think those are really important. I think compassion, I think empathy, I think curiosity about people and their backgrounds. Those are all just the starting places for being willing to hear what someone else has to say. Because if I'm not interested, I'm not listening, and I'm just waiting for you to finish so I can come back with more of what I want to say and drill down into your head, right? So
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the complete opposite of active listening, right? Just listening, waiting for your turn to kind of defend your point and your position. Yeah. And I think that part of the dialogue facilitation upskilling that I mentioned before has a lot to do with being that bridge builder, right? So all the things that you shared, exercising empathy, exercising openness. And I love the fact that you brought up curiosity, because that's one of our core values at NWC. I think that curiosity is such a great thread to keep the dialogue going, because it makes us be forced to kind of want more, which means then we're in a questioning frame of mind, which means we're listening to learn and not to just respond and react. And finding that common ground can be really important as well. Now, Aaisha, you are very vocal, and we share our Christian belief. I am a devout Christian. My faith is so incredibly important to me. It grounds me in everything that I do. And something that I often find challenging to navigate in some occasions is really just thinking about, how do I, as a DEI practitioner, navigate being really strong in my Christian belief and faith, but also making sure that I am maintaining the true tenets of what DEI exists to do, which is, to serve the most marginalized, to make sure that we're giving voice to the voiceless. And so I want to just get your thoughts on, how have you, as a Christian Black woman and also as a DEI professional and practitioner, how do you navigate being strong in your Christian belief, but advocating for difference, even if that difference doesn't necessarily align with your value sets? I think it's an important question for us to tackle.
That's a really important question, and one that I've never been asked. So I definitely appreciate that. I would like to say that I would never advocate for something that goes against the core tenets of who I am, because as a Christian, as a believer in Christ, my responsibility is to the kingdom of heaven first, right? So I have to put that out there. What I think a lot of people believe is, just because I have a different value set than you do means that I don't appreciate your humanity for what it is, and means that I can't advocate for your humanity, which is not true, right? So there may be things that I don't personally believe is how one should operate. For example, I don't drink, I don't smoke, right? But I'm not going to tell you that you can't, right? Like, I'm not going to start a campaign to say, oh my gosh, like we should have no smoking in the office or alcohol, whatever. It's such a stupid example. But like my point being is that just because someone is firm in their belief system and who they are, that does not mean that it is contradictory to them wanting to see people being able to thrive in the fullness of who they are. Because part
Yes.
of Christianity is the ability to choose for yourself, right? Jesus
Yes.
didn't tell us to go ahead and convince people to be Christians. He said to preach the word and tell people about him. But he also says if they didn't want to listen, shake the dust off your feet and keep going. So it's not my job to drag people into a position where they're now mimicking my beliefs or thinking the way that I think. No, that's not for me to do. What is for me to do, which the Bible talks about, is to love people. And in loving people, I think we have to understand that loving you does not mean I agree with you.
Yeah.
Loving you does mean, I'm respectful, I'm caring, I'm helpful when I can, right? But
Mm.
that doesn't mean that we have to agree. And that's one of the contentions that I have. It's in DEI, it's so interesting because people think, oh, well, if you don't think the way that I think, then you're denying my humanity. That's a falsehood. I don't know who told you that. That is
Yeah.
completely incorrect, right? So I can totally be for allowing you to express the full range of who you are, whatever that looks like. I'm 100% down for it because I believe in free will. I just don't ask me to say that I agree with what you're doing. That's a totally different conversation.
Yeah, it really is. And I so appreciate that, Aisha. One of the things that I often share, and this community has probably heard it before, is that acceptance doesn't always mean agreement, right? And
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
speaks to what you shared about the belief that everyone has free will, the freedom to choose, and that is centering humanity. And I do believe
Yeah,
that that's part of the Christian belief, the centering humanity. And so it's
absolutely.
a very complex topic,
It is
but again,
complex.
it is very complex, but it's one that I'm glad that we can engage in because,
Me
again, I
too.
think that having these difficult conversations is really important. And so I appreciate you leaning into that. Talk about your path, right? Because your background has been a lot in serving the needs of C-suite executives, right? And then
Mhm.
now you work directly into the space of DEI and anti-racism. So can you tell us a little bit about this transition, how it came to be exactly?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm gonna try to make a very long story short, but
Okay.
I was working at an organization and I was so naive at the time. Like I was already aware of and it wasn't anything that I was taught by like my mom. Actually, no, I did kind of see behaviors from her, and it's going to sound like I'm going all over the place, but like follow me here. So like when I would grow up, I would hear my mom use her white voice, and I'd be like, "Mom, why do you like talk like that on the phone when you're talking to these people?" And she's like, "What are you talking about? No, I don't." And then when I would do it, she's like, Aisha, why do you sound like that? Like as if she's like shaming me. Right? And I'm like, well, I learned it from you. So I say that to start to say that I always knew that there was this expectation that I had to change parts of who I was to fit into the larger dominant culture.
Mhm.
And I expected there to be pushbacks about how I wore my hair. And so I always got it straightened and blown out. And that's why it's not as long and pretty as it used to be because it's damaged. But there were just things that I knew that I had to compromise on, right? And so one time I was working at this organization and I'm like, okay, I know the drill, I know the game. But what shifted for me was that the energy that I usually would get from white people, like one person actually thinking that I was the server when I was just simply going to buy a drink,
Mhm.
um, I started to receive that same kind of treatment from a Black woman in C-suite. And that's
Yeah.
when I said, I'm not dealing with this crap.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like I can
Mhm.
take it from other folks, but you're supposed to be in community with me, or so I thought, right? Because we were both Black women. Again, I was so naive at the time. And I'm just like, yeah, we're all rooting for everybody Black and we got each other's back. And it's like, no, there are a lot of people invested in whiteness so much that you are nothing more than it was pretty much Aisha, you have to conform to what their expectations are because if not, then I look bad. And
Yeah.
I didn't stay at that organization for much long. I had to make the decision to leave. And from then I said, you know what? I'm never working in corporate again, which turned out to be a lie. But that was kind of what led me onto the journey of vocalizing everything that I have ever felt about corporate America. And I just started spilling it out on LinkedIn. And, sure enough, people, I'm grateful that they cared enough to hear what I said and thought it was impactful, that they just started reaching out and, looking for help in terms of just like anti-racism training and like, perspectives on diversity in the organization. So that's really where the shift happened.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that story. I think that sometimes people assume that people of color, Black people specifically, that we are immune to centering whiteness, but we
Yeah.
as a society have been conditioned to that. And so oftentimes it is unconscious.
Yeah.
And so I think calling that out so that even we as Black people can be mindful of it to try to help break that is really critical. So I'm glad you brought that to the conversation. So you actually, and I just want to bring up, because I know you and I both are in community with Dr. Janice Gassam, and her
Oh my
book is,
gosh, she's the best.
yeah, I know, but her book is coming out in October. It really helps to break that down in many regards. And so I just want to give a shout out to her, and it's called Decentering Whiteness in the Workplace. And so I hope that you all will consider getting that.
Yes, I pre-ordered.
Great.
I'm just waiting on mine, so I'm excited. Hope
Likewise,
you all
likewise.
pre-order.
Likewise. And so what I want to talk about now is when you were working with those C-suite leaders, I would imagine that there were a lot of lessons and there were a lot of, and when I say lessons, I'm talking about things that maybe you gravitated to say, I like this leadership style, I like this philosophy. But then I would imagine that there were also some lessons that you said, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to do that. So maybe just share with this community, what are some of those lessons that may fall on both ends of the spectrum that you continue to hold and to govern yourself by?
Yeah, I think, in terms of and are we talking specifically to DEI or just like leadership in general? I just
Well,
want to.
just in general, yeah, because to
Okay.
me, I believe that inclusion and equity, it is leadership. So I want us to get to this
Right.
point where we normalize, stop trying to put them in separate boxes. And so
I
I want
love
you to
that. I
answer
love
that
that.
question as though they are connected, okay?
Okay, perfect. That's brilliant. Um, so one of the things that I would say I admire um is it's so interesting because I feel like there's this dichotomy, right? So like I witnessed there be like this very people centric approach. And so in some organizations, some CEOs, they will do whatever it takes. It's like the summer and like these little tiny like flies are just, it's so annoying. Sorry.
You're fine.
um, there is a personal cost that some CEOs will take on in order to keep their organizations going, just so that the people under them have jobs. And so I love, one of the things that I love in terms of leadership is taking on, it's not this idea of like family per se, but it's having this mindset that I am responsible for these 500, 2,000, 5,000 people. And I need to do whatever I need to do to make sure that these people continue to have jobs. And it's just
Yeah.
not about them building their empire, but they really have a sense of I don't want to say ownership, I don't know if that's the right word, but like this care, this responsibility, like these are my people that I have to look out
Yeah.
for. I need to keep the lights on because they, you know, um need to make a living. And so I think that is one of the more beautiful kind of approaches to leadership that I have seen. And then of
Mm,
course on the other end of the
yeah.
spectrum, right, which we've all probably have witnessed, there is this very diabolical, ruthless, like I don't care what I have to do to, if I
Cutthroat
need to,
business. Yeah.
right, exactly. We need to get rid of a whole business unit. We need to fire, the whole diversity function because like we just don't have the line item budget for it right now. Like there
Right.
is ruthless kind of setting of priorities. And I always say, which, many people will say, if you follow the money, right, you'll see what people prioritize and what's most important to them,
Yeah.
especially in terms of like DEI and budget cuts. And so I think that's one of the more the examples I would say it's not something that I would ever want to engage in and be a part of or even help facilitate. Like I don't want to help facilitate which a lot of I don't want to say a lot, which some human
Yeah.
resource professionals do facilitate the systematic erasure and destruction of Black and Brown people and organizations to save face for the organization. That's
Yeah.
another thing that I've seen, which I
Yeah.
think is, I understand people need to keep a job. I don't know what kind of lifestyle that they grew up in that they feel like that's okay. Again, I'm not judging, but it's just something that I've seen and don't want to be a part of. It's a lesson that is just like, no.
Yeah, no, I understand that. We've had some inquiries about Dr. Janice's book that we referenced before. And so we have placed that link into the chat for those that are interested. So Aaisha, tough question probably, but I'm curious. Can the workforce aid in true liberation of Black people? Why or why not? What are your thoughts?
No, it can't. Because it just wasn't set up to be that way.
Yeah, yeah,
It just, I
yeah,
mean, I feel like we're trying to fix a thing that was built for an totally different purpose. And so in my mind, the only thing there is to do is to tear it down and build a new system.
yeah,
That's mainly how I feel. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about like how effective has DEI been in the last, several decades, or whatever. But I think it's, when we talk, one of the things that which baffles me the most is, and I think this is like one of the points that I wanted to make, is that we have Black executives going to
mhm,
white executives, and this goes around this idea of like not putting, of again, like centering whiteness, right? When we talk about DEI initiatives. So
yeah,
we have Black CDOs or brown CDOs. We're going to white folks. We're asking them for the money, right? So they have to sign off on how much they decide they want to give to the effort. They have
mhm,
to sign off on the parameters and the boundaries of what they want DEI to look like. They
yeah,
get to dictate to us what's too far and what's not too far. And
yeah,
so this whole system is set up around appeasing white executives and making sure that the work is palatable for them,
yeah,
which is hugely problematic. And then when you have businesses that operate on this framework that the bottom line is the most important, right? That goes against it totally goes against like the principles of DEI, because at the end of the day, money is important, but it's not more important than, I would say, individuals' mental health and their well-being and how they're able to like operate and
yeah,
move inside of an organization. So it's just, I don't think the way that our current workforce is set up is conducive to any type of real place to be liberatory for Black people to just be the full, just to be
yeah.
themselves. And yeah, I don't think that's possible right now.
Do you
Or
think an increase in Black founders, Black entrepreneurship is maybe a way to solve for that in some regards?
I do, as long as those individuals have started the work on decolonizing themselves, because all you're going to do is just
Mhm.
take the models that you've
Yeah.
learned from white
Okay.
people and whiteness and then replicate it into a Black organization. And so you're going to have the same thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's the distinction. It's possible, but it's possible if you're going into this already have shedding whiteness in a sense and learning what it means, who you are apart from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important distinction. So thank you. So I'm going to be shifting in a little bit to take audience questions. And if you are interested in presenting some type of question to our guest co-host today, or maybe even just contributing with some commentary or a resource, then you can let us know by using the raise hand feature here in Zoom. And that indicates to me that you're willing for us to spotlight you and invite you to unmute yourself and share. Or if you are here and you have a question, but you don't necessarily want to be highlighted, then you certainly can just place your question into the chat chat, and we will make sure that it finds its way. And so while you're percolating on maybe some of those curiosities you're holding, I'm going to go to the next question, Aaisha. And this deals with the positioning that you take around your work in anti-Blackness. And I want to understand from your vantage point, how does anti-Blackness show up in non-Black marginalized groups in the workplace? And then what can we do to combat that?
That's a really great question. I think I want to start with the end part of that question. What we can do to combat that is to help people understand, which we don't need to, it's not our responsibility, but for people to understand that their proximity to whiteness will only get them so far. And as soon as somebody has a problem with you, you're going to be their target. So you may be a buffer right now and not seen as, those Blacks and given a position that is a little bit more higher on the totem pole, so to speak. But there is going to come a time where you will see that you are disposable, expendable, and not even looked at the same way as their white colleagues and counterparts. We know that there is a cliff for Asian Americans, and I'm just going to use them as an example in this case, when it comes to leadership roles. Like in tech, they're very overrepresented in, I would say, entry level, maybe even sometimes middle management, but then there's a stop gap, right? And so that in itself should prove that, or should say, no matter how hard that I try to buffer myself against being seen as other, as seen as a different, perfect minority, I'm still not seen as good enough to get to where they are, right? So I think that realization will help to combat that. But to the first part of your questions, I think some of the ways it shows up is, I've had people speak to me in ways that they would never speak to a white person. Yeah. And I'm just like, and I had to call them out on it. And then the person, they swear it was such an interesting story. They swear that they're not biased at all against Black people. And I'm just like, no, I think you need to kind of sit with that a bit and really rethink that. But there was just such a hostility that I had not seen and that my colleagues had not seen from this particular person. And we both posed the question, hey, if this was the white executive assistant or, someone else, would you have responded? Would you have been so aggressive in your conversation to the point where they were disrespectful? And so I think non-Black people of color, and I hate saying people of color, but other marginalized groups who are not Black, I think that they take on whiteness so much the fact that they think that they can police what we do. They can, again, treat us as if, I would say, treat us in a way where they expect that we are not going to push back or, I don't want to say retaliate, but kind of just stand up for ourselves in a way. I think a lot of times what Black people who are part of marginalized groups also do is they remain quiet when they see injustices, because again, they want to make sure that they maintain their space and their proximity to white individuals, right? So it's like, oh yeah, I saw that happen and she said this, but I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to upset I don't want to upset folks. And so I think they mimic the behaviors that they're seeing in the workplace, which, there's so many different ways when you talk about, I'll see sometimes a group of, let's just say Latinx individuals hovering, right? Or the separation kind of, and and it's not just them, it'll be them in a mix of white colleagues. And then there'll be an Asian American subset, but there'll also be a mixture of white colleagues. And then, but it's Black people have been kind of psychologically cut off from this group based on their, oh my gosh, I don't know how to say it. You can feel as if you're not wanted in a sense.
Oh yeah.
So Like, so
Yeah, we
I
know we
think
don't belong for sure. Is
we
that
know
it's
we don't belong. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And I feel like that's one of the ways it shows up as well. I know I've noticed, like, when, let's say if I'm in the office or other Black individuals, we'll pull people in. We'll say, hey, like, come sit with us. How are you? Like, what are you up to? What are you working on? The other way around, it doesn't go like that. They stay in their bubble. And so I think that's another way that they reinforce anti-Black behaviors in the workspace by physically setting boundaries with us.
Yeah, really interesting. So Takia, I saw that your hand was raised and then you took it down. So I just want to give you, there you go. Okay. And then we also following Takia, we do have a question that came in from one of our members of that's watching us LinkedIn Live. And so welcome Takia. I want to give you a chance to present your question. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a really rich and great conversation today. I work in the space of HR, but I'm also helping to create our DEI strategy. And there's a couple of things that you ladies talked about today. I'm grateful to be at a company where folks are really, they seem and appear to be really invested in this work. But at the same time, you talked about like decolonization and being bold about what's needed and not just kind of following along with kind of where your leaders may feel is needed, and pushing kind of that envelope to go beyond that and really increasing those percentages, right, in a way that is impactful. And I think a space that is really prevalent at any corporation is recruiting and hiring and bringing in diverse talent. And a lot of times you'll hear, we get a lot of our talent through referrals. And obviously, if the majority of the company is white, those referrals are going to be white. And being able to encourage to go beyond that. And then, hearing things like, well, we just don't see them. They're not out there. We can't find them. And recruiting isn't necessarily my strong suit. We have a recruiting, partner for that, who struggles with trying to find diverse candidates. So just wanted to listen or hear your thoughts or recommendations around really making that kind of an impact so that we are the change we want to see. But then once you get those folks in, how do you make that sustainable? How do you keep retention? How do you create a space that they actually will feel like they can grow and thrive in and want to continue to be there once you get them there?
That's a great question. To the latter point of your question, creating a space where people want to stay, to me, it starts with changing the makeup of your organization. I'm not going to want to stay, even if I was hired into the organization, if I continue to see a mainly all-white executive leadership team. I am going to feel like I am not wanted. If I continue to see predominantly white or, SVP, VP and above level, to me, that's a signal that I will never be able to advance. So there's different cues that the organization are putting out that's telling you, okay, you're welcome here for a bit, but I really don't see you going beyond this particular level. So for me, I need the environment to be changed before I'm going to want to stay when I get in the door, because there's going to be a high rates of turnover. Like we see that. To your earlier question, I think can you repeat it for me about like getting more talent? And I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you mentioned, which makes sense, that you want to see the change, right? And in order to see the change, we have to recruit it. And, this is my first time working in this particular industry. So I don't have like a network of diverse people to bring in.
Mm-hmm.
How do you encourage folks to look beyond their network? And I hear things like, I'm looking and I don't see it. There's not at certain levels, if we're looking at the senior leadership level, well, they're not out there, and for whatever reasons, because systematic racism never allowed us to break past that ceiling. So how do we find that talent out there?
Yeah, I think like for me, it starts at the top. So the CEO, I would even go further into the board, but the board and the CEO have to make decisions about, even if they're putting into place, I mean, this may sound a bit radical. I really haven't thought about it until just now it popped into my head. If they have to put into place caps on length of services when you are at, in the C-suite, which kind of sounds crazy, I'm sure, to a lot of people on this call, but people will stay in positions for as long as they can. And so there's no room for anyone else to come in. But if the board is mandating and say, hey, like, every 3 years, well, we need to have this percentage makeup in the executive suite office, and if they have to do that by ways of like capping assignments and then promising them a role somewhere else, like I really don't know. I haven't fleshed out in my head much, but I think it starts with it starts with the CEO being willing and the board being willing to go out and find executive leadership talent, because they are there. Like this Dr. White, like there's so Dr. Janice, like there's so many incredible Black talent out there that could come in and take over an innumerable amount of roles in an organization. And I think that is where the change is going to happen. So me doing my best efforts to bring Black people into an organization at entry level, I mean, it's nice because in a way where it's like, people are having jobs and they're getting exposed to certain things that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. But then that reality matched up against a reality where for decades, you're seeing a monolithic board. There's a disconnect there. So the focus really shouldn't be, and the onus shouldn't be on you bringing in Black talent. The onus should be on executive level individuals and the CEO saying, I need to diversify my leadership and trickle down from there. Like a bottom up, for me, approach is not going to work. Like it totally has to be top down. And so they're making you feel like a failure, right? Again, putting the onus on the
and not necessarily me, but like my recruiting partner,
right,
who is white, but does feel
that's another part of the problem. Sorry, go ahead.
And it just kind of does feel like there is a little bit of pressure to find people in spaces that she just quite frankly says she doesn't know how to or where to look.
But that excuse doesn't fly. I mean, there's Google, there's LinkedIn, she could join African-American meetups, Black professional meetups. Like that excuse to me does not fly. People do what they want to do at the end of the day. So for her saying that she can't find it means she's not interested or invested in finding it, because we know as Black people, if our boss gives us an assignment, we don't go back and say, oh, we couldn't do it. We find a way to get it done. So when people are saying they're struggling with something and their hands are just like, oh my gosh, like I can't, that means they don't want to. So that's a different issue. It's not an issue about they can't find the talent. It goes to a hard issue about they don't want to find the talent and they're using that as an excuse to tell you that the talent is not out there and it's hard to find. Don't let people hoodwink you like that. That's no.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with a systems change whereby there are key practices and action items that those hiring managers, recruiters have to follow systematically. And if you follow those best practices systematically, you're going to eventually see some type of change in the pool of candidates. And so, I think also that's part of it. Is it's just like Aaisha is saying, if you don't know how to do something, you don't sit back and say, I don't know how to do it. You figure it out. There's way too many resources, consultants, webinars, way too many resources that can help bridge that gap. And so thank you so much, Takia. I appreciate your question today. I committed to this person on LinkedIn who has a question, so I'm going to try to squeeze one more in. And the question is this, Aaisha: can you touch more on the concept of decolonizing oneself? I think it is incredibly important when leaders take on new roles, leave baggage behind, so to speak. How do we decolonize ourselves? Yes.
Yeah, so there's many ways, and I'm sure there are scholars much brighter than me who have written books on the topic. But for me, I think one of the ways that we do that is start to interrogate. We start to look closely at our behavior when we're in predominantly white spaces and when we're not in predominantly white spaces, and then start to take note of what's changing and why it's changing. And then really go in and interrogate the thought process behind it, the feelings behind it, the emotions behind it. So take, for example, when we're code switching, right? If I'm talking a certain way at work than I do at home, I need to take a step back and say, why is this happening? And then when I get to the why is this happening, it's, you start to just dig deeper and deeper and deeper down, into like, okay, well, who told me that I needed to be this way in order to be successful? Where did I learn this? How do I feel about myself if I'm not code switching? Do I feel like I'm less of a person or I'm not worthy if I don't come to work with my hair straight? Why do I feel that way? Well, I've been told Black women are not beautiful when they're in there. You know what I mean? Like you have to start to go down the rabbit hole and be honest with yourself about why you are engaging in the behaviors that you are. And then you're going to start to replace those ugly, nasty white supremative narratives with truth. And I think that is one of the way that we can start, in my mind, decolonizing ourselves and how we show up in spaces.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for the audience member that's joining us on LinkedIn for the question. And thank you, Takia, also for your question. We are out of time. And I hate that because I know that we could probably go for another hour just digging deeper into this broad and really important topic. But I do want to thank you, Aaisha. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing your perspective, your thoughts, your insights. Thank you to this podcast community for joining us as well. Takia, I want to give you the final 30, 60 seconds to close this out in whatever way that feels appropriate to you. What have I not asked you about that you want to leave this audience with?
Oh, you said Takia, but I think you meant me.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I did say Takia, but I meant Aaisha. I'm looking at you both. We still have you spotlighted, Takia.
It's okay.
Yes, close us out. Thank you.
No worries. I think someone actually made a great point in the chat about you can still have structures and policies in place, but that may not be an end all solve. And then that goes into people knowing how to, I would say, get around a system, right? Because there's like when we look at, oh gosh, how do I say it? When we look at slavery and then how it actually, there's a form of slavery today with like prison labor, policies and things have changed, but the methods have just become different and kind of morphed and, like chameleon like to where you can't really see what's happening right under our nose. And so I think it goes, while structure and policy is very important, I think it also goes back to a heart, like the hearts and minds of people. If the hearts and minds of people aren't changed, there's no amount of policy in the world that's going to stop someone from trying to figure out a way around that policy by hiring the best lawyers that they can. And so one thing I do want to leave with people is that when we talk about DEI and the work that it takes in to push the change, I really want you to start thinking about the permission that you're seeking. You're seeking permission from white executives to go against their best interests, right? To do something that, for Black and brown folks that they may not even really in their hearts want to do. We're asking people to give us humanity. And I think that is the approach that I have rejected for so long. And I want people to really start thinking about it. Why do you have to, and I get it's a business, right? Like budgets have to be approved and all of this stuff, but if I can't, as a Black woman with all my expertise, come in and say, this is what we need to do without you chopping out the pieces that you think are unacceptable because we have to move at the pace that you think that we have to move at the pace of, is it a worthy endeavor to engage in? And I would proffer that the answer is no. And you need to move on and find a CEO that will actually let you take the reins and do what you're there to do without question. I don't want to say without question, right? But like, you get what I'm trying to say, without pulling apart pieces that, oh, the organization may not be ready, or this is too progressive, or this is too, like, we need to start leaning on ourselves as opposed to, again, this word seeking permission for our humanity in these spaces. That to me is just undignified. And so that's the last thing I just would like to leave with everyone.
Aisha, we're so grateful for your time today. Thank you for leaving us with so much to interrogate and to digest and ponder and process. And we look forward to what's to come for you in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank
Have a
you.
great, safe weekend. We'll see you hopefully next Friday for another session of Intentional Conversations podcast. Bye-bye.
Thank you.